Good morning, everyone. I am Matt Clark with Veritas CFO, and today I'm lucky to have State Senator Brandon Beach on our podcast. Senator Beach was elected to the Senate in 2013 and serves District 21, which includes portions of Cherokee and Fulton counties. He was the chairman of the General Assembly's Freight and Logistics Commission for the past 2 years, and he is an expert on transportation policy. So, Senator Beach, thank you very much for joining me today, and I really appreciate your time to talk with me.
Well, Matt, thank you very much. Appreciate being on your podcast, and I appreciate that kind introduction.
Great, and so as we can see in your background too, you're a LSU alum, and I guess you got the highs and lows of being a Tiger fan, right, over the past couple of years.
Yeah, we had a great time 2 years ago when we won it all. We had a tough game against UCLA this weekend, but I love my LSU Tigers. I grew up in New Orleans, went to LSU. My wife went to LSU. So we have deep roots down in Louisiana, but we've been here 27 years and made Georgia our home. Our daughter went to University of Georgia, so I do learn how to bark like a bulldog because it saved me a bunch of money with the Hope Scholarship. So we love Georgia too. But we love living here in Georgia. It's been a great place to raise our kids. And now they've come back, and now we have a grandchild, and they're raising their daughter here as well. So we're very fortunate to live in Georgia.
Yeah, that's great. And would love to talk about college football all day, but we need to stick to our discussion on transportation policy here. So we'll move on. But before we dig into that, can you tell us more about your background and your experience both in the Senate and prior or in the private sector?
Yeah, I moved here with Quaker State Motor Oil and was in their national sales, and then I left them when we got acquired by Pennzoil, and I ran for city council in Alpharetta, and I did that, and then I was on the Greta board. I was appointed by Sonny Perdue. I did Greta for 4 years, the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority, and then I got elected to the DOT board, and I served 8 years on the DOT board representing the 6th congressional district, and that's really where I learned about transportation and how federal funds flow and how the money flows and so on, and how to get projects built, go through the environmental process. And then I became a senator 10 years ago. And for the last 6 years, I was Senate Transportation Chairman. So I've been involved in transportation really since my days at Greta. I don't know that I'm an expert, but I do know it is kind of something that I'm passionate about. I believe in, and I've always said this, and you may have heard me say this before, Matt, but there's a direct correlation between infrastructure investment and economic development and job creation. And if you put in the infrastructure, the jobs will come. And Georgia 400 is a classic example of that. They built that back in the 70s, and people said, why'd you build this road to nowhere? And now you look at Georgia 400, and it's a huge economic engine for the state, this whole 400 285 corridor. When you think about just the fintech business alone in the 400 corridor, when you go to California or New York and you hit your credit card, it's being processed through what we call Transaction Alley right here, 285 and 400 with First Data, Fiserv, all these companies that do the credit card processing. So we are really the fintech capital of the country. So that infrastructure investment, and that 400 was built with Appalachian Development Highway money. And again, people thought, why are you building this? Matter of fact, back in the 70s, they closed it for a month so that they could film Smokey and the Bandit. Now, I can tell you, if we tried to close 400 for a month now, I'd be run out of office because of the volume and the traffic that we have. But it's a good thing. And we've got a lot of jobs and prosperity up here because of that investment on Georgia 400.
Yeah. So, certainly didn't know all that. And again, we'll probably talk about Smokey and the Bandit a lot here too. It was a good movie when I was growing up, but we'll keep pushing forward here. So as I mentioned at the start, you chaired the State Commission on Freight and Logistics. What made the General Assembly decide to create that commission?
Well, if you look back since 2015, we have been laser focused on transportation issues. With the passing of the Transportation Funding Act in 2015, we went from a sales tax to an excise tax so GDOT would have a reliable stream of income to build infrastructure. And we were one of the few states that did that and got way ahead of the game on that. Then the next thing we looked at, both Chairman Tanner and I, about 3 years ago, we passed a bill creating the ATL, the Atlanta Transit Link, so that we would have a metro transit system that talked to each other. You had all these fragmented transit groups around the metro area, and none of them communicated. And with the ATL, now you can go to one app and one website, one payment method, and you can cross jurisdictional lines in a very seamless, efficient, clean, and most of all, safe manner. So then we said, okay, we've addressed the funding, we've addressed the metro transit. The next big issue is freight and logistics, and how we move 18-wheelers and how we move freight and product through our state. And we knew the port is growing at double digits every year, and that is a economic engine for us. And so we knew that port was going to continue to grow, especially after COVID, when people started really doing e-commerce. It was unbelievable how fast things grew. Even during COVID, the port grew at 16.6%, which was really good. And one other thing, Matt, is we are the only port in the country that exports more than it imports. It's 52-48. Now, we export a lot of chicken and agriculture products, but we export more than we import, that's a good thing. But what we did realize is, right when we started looking at it, 83% of the traffic coming out of the port is on an 18-wheeler, only 17% on rail. And, you and I both know we can't take many more 18-wheelers around 285 and 85 and 75. It's just, and coming up I-16. So we've got to do something about our truck traffic. And if we continue to grow at 16%, we've got to figure out a way to get more traffic on rail. Now, we've done that by creating multimodal terminals around the state. Also, we've invested heavy in the Jimmy Mason rail yard down at the port, to where product can go straight from the ship to the rail car. It doesn't have to go onto a truck, then to the rail car, which will save a lot of time, and that will cut the time down to get it faster here to Atlanta. Anytime you can put product on a rail car, you take 3.5 truckloads off the road. So that's a good thing. Our goal is to get our rail traffic up from 17 to about 35%. If we can do that, we can continue to grow at double digits, and we'll still have about the same amount of truck traffic, but we will eliminate the growth of the truck traffic, if that makes sense. So that's our goal, and we're going to work hard to do that. So we really want to work with CSX and Norfolk Southern and the different rail companies to really promote more rail coming out of the port.
All right. So yeah, touching on that point about the percentage of freight coming off the rail from 17 to 35%. You mentioned the Jimmy Mason. That's the Mason mega rail project that you're talking about down at the port, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, so, and that'll allow the product to get taken from the ship straight to the rail, and not have to go on a truck to then be trucked over to the rail. And so that will be a huge savings of time. And it's all about time. They want to get product into Atlanta as quickly as possible to those mega distribution centers, and then go out to the rest of the country. And I will tell you, Matt, when I was on the DOT board, I used to give speeches, and I would say we were the logistics capital of the Southeast. And I'll admit I was wrong. We're the logistics capital of the Eastern Seaboard. After we did this study for 2 years, we saw where all this product's going to, up the East Coast, to St. Louis, to Chicago. It's unbelievable where we're sending product, which is a great thing.
Right. Well, so you talked about St. Louis too. I've heard you talk about cutting the travel time of freight down from 48 hours to 24 hours, and expecting certainly that would be make the state more attractive to shippers too. What are the steps involved to basically cut that time in half? Well,
the biggest step is what I just talked about, getting it from the ship to the rail car quickly. That's going to save hours and hours and hours. And then also making sure that we have bridges and so on, to where these trains can keep moving. They never have to stop. Grade separations and different things that we're working on with the commissioner, and making sure we can double stack stuff and get things moving quickly. So we're doing everything we can to promote freight on rail, and it's all about time. It's all about time.
Right. Understood. So, moving back to the commission, you talked about why the General Assembly created the commission. And the commission lasted 2 years. What were the major findings coming out of the commission?
Well, we found out a couple things. One, we need to invest in rail, and that was one of the biggest findings, was that only 17% was on rail. We also found out we have a shortage of truck parking. We also found out we have a shortage of truck drivers. We just realized we need to continue to invest in heavy infrastructure. And those were some of the findings. So we know what we need to do. The real key now, Matt, is how we're going to pay for it. It all comes down to one thing: funding, and how we're going to pay for these projects that we need to do, whether that's truck lanes around LaGrange and around Atlanta or whatnot. It all takes money. And so we've got to figure out how to pay for it. And one of the things we've got to do is we got to make sure that we don't cost the Savannah Port money, as far as they have some of the lowest fees as far as freight fees and so on, very similar to Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. You talk to Delta Airlines and their fees are a lot cheaper than they are in New York, here in Atlanta. So we've got to make sure that we don't put them in an uncompetitive advantage, if you will. But we've got to figure out where the money's going to come from to fix this problem and to invest in it. And I think what the port needs to do, and all the companies that are in this business, they need to look at it as an investment and not a tax of any sort. That it's an investment. And I believe that as long as that money is very similar to the 400, when we were talking about getting rid of the tolls, and we had the tolls on 400, we wanted to make sure that those 50 cents, that 50 cents you threw in the toll basket, stayed in the 400 corridor. We didn't want that money to go build roads down in Savannah or whatnot. If the people that were paying for it were the Georgia 400 residents, we wanted to have that money stay in the corridor. Very similar to what a CID does, which I run. We self-tax ourselves, but we have to build projects that stay within the district. So we've got to look at this as an investment for the freight and logistics business, if you will. And I think if we do that, we'll be able to figure out a way to pay for it, whether it's a tax on weight or freight or whatnot. And I hate to even use the word tax, but we've got to figure out a way to invest in this infrastructure that we're going to need for freight and the logistics in the trucking industry. Right.
So that good segue into the next question is that, I know one of the follow-ups and another commission that was recently created, this commission on the freight infrastructure funding. Your commission came up with listed some ideas or options for funding. You talked about some of those, like a BMT or a tax on the weight of freight. I think you had public-private partnerships, right? Or some of the other ideas that your commission came up with that the new commission is going to have to look over or dissect.
Yeah, we looked at increasing the motor fuel tax, which I don't think we're going to do. We looked at a fee on imports and exports, and a container fee, and that's when the port really fought back on that, because they didn't want to be, higher than Jacksonville or any other port in the Southeast. So we didn't do that. So there's also talk about a commercial VMT or a fee on the value of freight moved. But we're going to have to look at that. And like I said the other day when I spoke to the DOT board, we can't, make this. It must be not based on hurting any industry, whether it's the port or the airport. We've got to figure out how we all pay equitable payments to do this. So I don't have the answers, and that's what's I think this next year is going to be focused solely on funding, because the first 2 years we found out what the problems were and what we needed to invest in. When you look at, for example, truck parking, I think the private sector can do that through truck stops. I think we can also help. We have these Greta parking lots. I think we have 27 Greta parking lots around the state that are full during the day, but they're empty at night. So we can figure out how we leverage Greta's parking lots into letting trucks park there. We cannot allow trucks to continue to park on the entrance and exit ramps of interstates. It's a safety hazard. It's not good for the trucker. It's not good for the traveling public. So we've got to figure out a way to get those trucks parked. And what brought this to light was they go to electronic logs now, and they have to stop at 10 hours. I mean, and you know that. So they can't, or they start getting fined. So they can't, there's no fudging anymore, if you will, on paper logs. So we've got to figure out a way to get these truckers parked in a safe place off the interstate system.
Right. Yeah, certainly understand that part. So earlier in the discussion, you mentioned economic engines. I've also heard you talk about three main economic engines of the state: the Atlanta Airport, the Port of Savannah, and the Georgia World Congress Center. And certainly, the airport and Port of Savannah drive significant freight in the state and throughout the country. But can you share some more details on what you mean by these economic engines?
Well, look, the World Congress Center, don't discount that. They've got 18-wheelers driving up to that, delivering when they have a boat show, or whether they have a poultry convention or whatnot, or some kind of equipment convention. They have trucks coming in and out of that loading docks down there. That's a huge economic engine for us, fills up our hotels and our restaurants and so on. So the World Congress Center is a huge economic engine. Obviously, the busiest airport in the world, Hartsfield-Jackson, is a huge economic engine. I do think we can figure out a way to expand their cargo. They're not even in the top 10 in cargo shipments. We're number one in passenger, but we're not number one in cargo. And I'm not saying we should be number one, but we should be in the top 10 in Atlanta in air cargo. And then obviously the Port of Savannah. I just think it's going to continue to grow. I don't know if you've been down there and taken a tour, but it's a well-run machine. And so I'm really impressed with what that's doing and the jobs it creates, and then the distribution centers around Atlanta that create jobs. And let me just share this with you. I want to share with you this, and I'm going to read this, but this is really kind of crazy to think about this. But online spending in May of 2020 reached 82.5 billion, a 77 year-to-year increase. Daily e-commerce sales increased 49% in April of 2020. 2019 had only 2 days of $2 billion sales outside of the holidays, besides the holidays. As of August of 2020, we've had 130 straight days of $2 billion in revenue. Now, that's incredible. Now, COVID caused a lot of that because of the pandemic. People started ordering from their phones. I can tell you, when I'm at home in my subdivision, I see Amazon trucks, I see UPS trucks, I see FedEx trucks. They're delivering product, and so that's not going away. It's gotten so easy to shop. My wife shops online all the time, and so online spending is going to continue to increase, not just during the holidays, but daily. So we've got to figure out, and I tell this story all the time. My wife, for example, she just thinks that package mysteriously shows up at our door. She doesn't realize that it comes into the port, gets on an 18-wheeler or a rail car, goes to a distribution center, gets reworked, then gets on a UPS, FedEx, or Amazon truck, and then has to be delivered on our network of roads around the metro area. So there's a lot of working parts to get that package delivered, and we need to focus and let the public know that just doesn't happen by accident, if you will.
Right.
So,
right,
anyway, so e-commerce is here and it's not going away, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. So shifting gears slightly here. So last year I attended the Georgia Motor Trucking Association's annual conference, and one of the most engaged topics was on truck liability and insurance and these punitive jury verdicts, the so-called nuclear verdicts. And even the president of ATRI, the American Transportation Research Institute, talked about tort reform. So, what are your thoughts on these nuclear verdicts, and do you see any tort reform on the horizon for the General Assembly?
I will tell you who is the biggest advocate for tort reform in the Senate is Senator Steve Gooch, who also served on the DOT board with me, 12 years ago, before he went to the Senate. We were the only two that went from the DOT board to the Senate. And I will tell you, he is passionate and laser focused on tort reform. We have some of the worst laws in the country. And so I would tell you that he is going to be focused on that again. I think the key is to make sure that we're training these truck drivers from day one correctly through the CDL process, and making sure that safety training is of the utmost goal of every company that has truck drivers, and making sure that safety is priority, and making sure that these trucks, don't allow texting and driving and that type of stuff. Right. But as long as they're following all the rules, accidents do happen, but we should make sure that we're doing everything we can to really talk about safety.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly agree with you there, and good to hear that tort reforms on the table. It's definitely a huge issue for the trucking industry for sure. And so, another topic that we talked about at the GMTA conference was the shortage of truck parking, which you already talked about with Greta and the truck stops, and maybe even repurposing these rest areas that are no longer being used.
Well, we're talking with the federal government. The US DOT is very particular on what you can do on rest stops and how long people can stay and what you can sell at a rest stop and so on. And they need to loosen that up from a federal standpoint to allow the states to have a little more supervision and opportunities on the rest stops. The Greta lots also, because we receive federal funding, that was one of the problems Chris Tomlinson was telling me we had with the Greta lots. But we have to do that through state funding. We may have to have some state truck lots that we run, but I think the private sector is the way to go on that. The problem is the price of land around the metro area is getting so expensive in the recent years. It's going to be hard to find a place that's close to the interstate system that's attractive to these truck drivers, because again, time is money, and they want to be able to park and then be ready to hit the interstate the next day when they're rested. So, but we've got to figure that out, and we will. But I think Greta could play a good role on that. We've identified out of the 27 parking lots of Greta, 9 of them that are close to interstates and that are not near subdivisions, that would be able to have trucks and not cause any noise problems for neighbors. And I think that would be the route to go. And we could add some bathrooms and showers or whatever we needed to do, and maybe have some people there to make sure there's no drug trafficking or any kind of illegal activities going on at the Greta parking lots at night.
Right.
And those truckers would be out of there by 6 in the morning when the traveling public would need them to go to their jobs at 6:30 in the morning.
Okay.
So we could make sure we work that out.
Right. Okay.
But so I think Greta could play a role.
Yeah, I mean, more of a sharing than just completely dedicated truck parking. So interesting idea. So Senator Beach, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking your time and sharing your thoughts on transportation policy. Just one last question before we wrap up. So going into the session next year, the General Assembly session, do you see any major issues impacting the transportation industry on the agenda next year?
Well, I'm hoping that Chairman Gooch that has now extended the Freight and Logistics Commission another year will come up with some funding opportunities. I mean, we kind of, we came up with 4 goals: double the amount of freight currently being carried on rail from 17 to 35%. That was one of our goals, and I think they're working with CSX and Norfolk Southern on that. Move Georgia from 4th in the nation for absorbing industrial space to number 1. So we're working with private companies to do that. strive to maintain speeds of 45 miles an hour or higher on all interstate highways, whether there's trucks on the road or not, making sure that traffic never slows below 45 miles an hour. And then again, as we talked about earlier, create a freight logistics network that allows cargo to get from Atlanta to St. Louis in 24 hours instead of 48 hours. So those are the goals. Now we just have to figure out how to fund them. And hopefully we can vote on a funding issue, hopefully next session. Now whether there may be a tort reform law that applies to the trucking industry also. And I will talk to Senator Gooch about that. But, we're going to be laser focused on freight and logistics, just as we were on transportation funding and metro transit. And we've accomplished those two things in the transit arena. And this is really our last big thing we have to tackle to make sure that we have the freight and logistics in place. And I think, the state of Indiana has come up with a freight and logistics plan, but I think we could really be the model, just like we were with House Bill 170 on the funding piece. So we'll continue to work hard. We'll work with both the rail companies, the trucking industry, private industry, distribution centers. One of the things I think distribution centers need to know is if they're going to locate somewhere, they should have rail capacity and try to make sure these distribution centers have rail capabilities, if you will. So, but we really appreciate you having me. I appreciate you having me on your podcast today to talk about freight and logistics and really the trucking industry as a whole. One of the other things we need to do is we need to start telling these kids in high school that they can go and get a CDL license and make very, very good money. Truck driving is not a bad career. It's a great career. And there's a lot of opportunity there for these young kids. I used to think everybody had to go to a 4-year college, and I was wrong. We don't need to do that. There are jobs that you can be trained for in anywhere from 12 to 18 months and get out and make very, very good money, $75,000 to $80,000 on up, if you're willing to work. And so, and I know everybody I talk to in this industry, we have a huge shortage of truck drivers. So we got to tackle that.
Yeah, good point. But you mentioned the 18-year-olds. Certainly the issue of having to be 21 years old to drive interstate, and still be 18 and drive interstate. But how does that issue get resolved about an interstate license at 18?
Yeah, that's a federal issue. But I would tell you, we have to look at if we get the 18 years older ones, driving in town and then promote them into, long haul truckers. I don't have the answers, but I do know we have got to figure out, because it's not just the long haulers that are having problems. It's I talked to a liquor distributor the other day. They got no drivers. Mm-hmm. Bert Jones, who's one of my colleagues in the Senate, has convenience stores and so on that they need truck drivers to deliver product, and they can't find drivers locally either. So maybe we bring them up slowly and promote them through the industry. Right. But we've got to start talking about it and letting these young people know, because what I worry about is if you look at the long haul, one of the things we talked about in this Freight and Logistics Commission was a lot of these drivers are getting ready to retire.
Right.
There's a big gap between the retired and there's nobody in the middle, and there's not many young people. So we've got to figure out how to fill the pipeline up, if you will.
Right. Yeah, certainly understand, and something the industry and everybody's got to come together to fill that void for sure. So, Senator Beach, thank you again very much for your time today. I really appreciate your comments.
Well, Matt, thank you, and we appreciate Veritas and all the people they employ in our state. Thank you for your investment in Georgia.
Great, thank you. Well, that wraps up our show for today. I really hope you enjoyed our talk, and please let us know your comments and feedback below, and make it a great day.